This is the Devil's Guide to D&D. Devil's Delegate here, with another dive into Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This time, it's the Sorcerer class. Tasha's introduced two new subclasses, the Aberrant Mind and the Clockwork Soul. But Wizards of the Coast did something a little different, with an eye toward repairing the class. So I'm not only going to be covering how good these subclasses are, but also, do they fix the Sorcerer problem? Now, what's the Sorcerer problem? It's that there is a general dissatisfaction with the class. In poll after poll, asking what classes are the most fun to play, players have ranked it at or near the bottom. In general, people find the Sorcerer supplies a subpar gaming experience. It ranks below fighters, below monks, and often below the ranger, and everyone has admitted that Wizards screwed up with the ranger's design. Compared to the other classes, players find the Sorcerer monotonous and restrictive. This is also demonstrated in homebrews. No class is homebrewed as often as the Sorcerer. For most other classes, people homebrew new subclasses, but the Sorcerer gets entire base class homebrews as people try and fix it. So what's wrong with the Sorcerer? It's not that the base class isn't effective. I'd put it above average for character classes. No, there's three problems: false advertising, lack of identity, and lack of variety. For the first, descriptions, lore, and general game color suggest that sorcerers are inherently magical, that it's natural for them. It's part of who they are, not what they do. But this isn't supported by the mechanics. There's no natural magic features for the sorcerer, like resistances or self-healing or the ability to naturally sense magic. In fact, when they cast a spell, they go through the same rigmarole as the wizard, with hand gestures and chanting and objects. How exactly is powdering a gemstone natural? That's the sort of thing you learn to do, like a wizard, not just develop. Then sorcerers are painted as blasters, and I use that term in the older game sense, that is distant strikers. I'm talking about being able to shoot epic beams of power at a single target. Except sorcerers are not all that good at that. I'd place the warlock higher. And as far as just general magical damage dealing, sorcerers don't stand above evoker wizards or warlocks. Sure, sorlocks might feel like the advertised blaster, but if you need a multi-class into a blaster class to become a blaster, then the base class isn't what it was said to be. So if sorcerers aren't what they're advertised to be, what are they? That's the problem. They don't have an identity. They're full casters, and full casters are mostly defined by their spells, and there are no sorcerer spells. Yes, Chaos Bolt, but beyond that, none. And they needed some. A bard spell list is made up of some wizard and some cleric and some druid spells, plus some spells specific to the bards. And sorcerers just get wizard spells. And if all you get are wizard spells, then you're a wizard. But in this case, a low-rent wizard, because sorcerers get fewer spells and no rituals. So what do they get that sets them apart from other wizards? Well, they get meta magic. Except that doesn't set them apart. Evoker wizards get Careful Spell without having to pay any points to use it. Enchanter wizards get Twin Spell. Blade Singers have the equivalent of Quicken Spell. And besides, sorcerers only get 4 meta magics. Now, people often say the problem is too few spells known. After all, the wizard has few base features as just like the sorcerer does, but isn't boring because all those spells give it options. But just raising the number of spells doesn't help because that would just give the sorcerer more wizard spells. The answer can't be just more spells, but more spells can be part of the answer if they bring style and a sense of identity. And that brings us to our two new subclasses, Clockwork Soul and Aberrant Mind. Do these solve the problems? Well, one of them helps. Both of these subclasses start the same way, by giving spells. A lot of spells. They both add 10 leveled spells to the Sorcerer's known spell list. And for a class that only gets 15 spells in its base, that's a big increase. It's rather funny seeing these added spells after for so long Wizards has been saying that they were not going to add spells to the Sorcerer list and that you shouldn't either. And in fact, you'll find anyone who's posted their homebrew classes or subclasses for Sorcerer will have many comments going, "Oh no, you've added spells, you can't do that." Well, Wizards has reversed that. What's more, they supply some powerful spells that you're going to want. Clockwork Soul provides Wall of Force, which is one of the best spells in the game. Lesser Restoration, also a spell that it's going to get a lot of use. Aberrant Mind is going to supply Dissident Whispers, Evard's Black Tentacles, and Rory's Telepathic Bond. Notice that these lists contain spells that are not from the Wizards list. We're getting Cleric spells, we're getting Warlock spells. Unfortunately, neither of these have any Sorcerer spells. That is, spells that were made specifically for the Sorcerer, and that's a disappointment. But they have at least given some variety from other lists, so let's give them credit where credit's due. For Aberrant Mind, they can trade these spells away for ones from the Divination or Enchantment schools. For Clockwork Soul, it's Abjuration and Transmutation. I'm a little iffy on that, because one thing about these spells is they're giving a theme, and one of the things that the Sorcerer desperately needs is a theme, an identity, and allowing you to simply trade these ones out for other spells of those schools means that the player might be grabbing spells that no longer really fit that theme. They just happen to be strong. But that's a little complaint, and it's probably not going to come up that much. For the most part, the better spells are already presented. I suspect there'll be a little bit of trading out. Hex is likely to be taken by anyone with Aberrant Mind, although Hex is a better spell for a Warlock than it is for a Sorcerer. The real gems come from the Chronomancy schools, and that's if your table allow those spells in. In that case, Aberrant Mind has Gift of Alacrity and Fortune's Favor, both nice spells. A Clockwork Soul brings in Temporal Shunt, which is not only a great spell, but also really fitting. And Clockwork Soul needs a bit of help in that really fitting category. Aberrant Mind is good. Aberrant Mind is covering that whole telepathic, psychic powers, mutated and connected to Lovecraftian lore. So we're getting spells that really have that tentacle or a mind-groping feel. Clockwork Soul is a little more problematic because there's not a whole lot of spells in the game that have a mechanical, law-like feeling about them. In fact, some of these just feel like healing. From here, these two subclasses diverge, so I'm going to take them separately. Let's take a look at Clockwork Soul first. Also at first level, the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer gets Restore Balance, which allows him to undo advantage or disadvantage. That's a nice feature. Feels very much clockworky. It gives the Sorcerer something to do that no one else can do, and it's useful. Bastion of Law. Starting at 6th level, you can create a Shimmering Shield of Order. As an action, you can expend 1 to 5 sorcery points, making this magical shield, and that ward represents a number of d8s equivalent to the number of sorcery points spent on it. So the shield will defend against 5 to 40 points worth of damage. That doesn't sound very much like a Shimmering Shield of Order. That's more like a Shimmering Shield of Randomness. Not sure how that wide a variance comes up as order, nor does this feel very sorcery. You might as well just make this another feature for the Abjuration Wizard. As far as abilities go, it's fine. It's not a fantastic feature for 6th level, but it's a good one. So effectiveness-wise, this is good. Sorcery-wise, it's a little iffy. At 14th level, there's Trance of Order. This allows the Sorcerer to go into a meditative, mechanical state, and for the duration, attack rolls don't benefit from advantage, and whenever the Sorcerer needs to make an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw, any rolls of 9 or less on the d20 are treated as a 10. Okay, this is a very good ability, though a little less good for the Sorcerer. After all, at 14th level, how often are attack rolls being rolled against the Sorcerer? Unless he's hanging out in the front line in front of the Barbarian, he really shouldn't be getting a whole lot of attack rolls against him. As far as whenever the Sorcerer makes an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw, when you want to use Trance of Order, you probably aren't going to be using it when you're making ability checks. And at 14th level, Sorcerers aren't making many attack rolls. If they'd write a few Sorcerer attack spells, then maybe they would be. But at this point, not so much. So the only real use for this is for saving throws. but that's a really good use. And with this, it means sorcerers are going to make all of their saves. This is excellent and worth using repeatedly. And you can use it repeatedly if you spend 5 sorcery points for it. That one facet of this ability makes it very good. The final feature is Clockwork Cavalcade. This lets you call in spirits. It would have been nicer to think of this as little machines and actually word it that way. But they come and they provide 3 different services for you. That is, they can restore up to 100 hit points divided amongst a number of creatures, or they can repair a damaged object, or they can disenchant any spells of 6th level or below that are on creatures within the area. I really like the feeling of repairing the damaged objects. That seems to fit the whole clockwork thing. How often that'll come up as actually useful, I don't know, but it's a nice ribbon. As far as disenchanting the effects, well, you're 18th level. Is there a lot of 6th level or lower effects that you're actually worried about that requires something like this? Chances are, if you're going to use this, you're going to end up using it for the 100 hit points. It's fine healing. And it's, again, turning this sorcerer into another healer, in which case you wonder why you just don't take the divine sorcerer. But it's okay. So the clockwork subclass gives us a little bit of style. It gives us a bit of variety and versatility. It doesn't quite pull off the overall theme enough. It doesn't quite give us enough to deal with the sorcerer problem. But it's a fairly effective sorcerer subclass. Certainly one that I would choose to play over several of the ones that are already in existence. This would probably be my second choice if I was going to play a sorcerer, and I would put it in the top 3 as far as actual quality of the subclass. A divine sorcerer also gets in that group. As far as the third member of that group, and the one that I would choose to play first, well, that would be the Aberrant Mind. Now, the Aberrant Mind started us off very well with that group of 10 spells, but there's actually 11. They added a cantrip as well, Mind Sliver. That's already on the sorcerer's list, but you've got it for free. And Mind Sliver is really good. It's not just really good for a sorcerer. For a sorcerer, it's fantastic, since with Mind Sliver, you can decrease your opponent's saving throws, which is something that's really a joy to cast before you cast your big spell that he has to save against. So you've got a bunch of nice spells here at the beginning, and then we move on to our second first level ability, which is telepathic speech. It's a minimal kind of ability. It's fine. It lets you speak to other members of your party telepathically. As far as effectiveness, since there's spells that do this, it's not anything great, but it's useful and you'll be happy to have it. But more, it feels fitting because you don't have to cast a spell. You don't have to do anything. You can just speak in people's minds. That seems to be a very sorcery type thing to do. Then at 6th level, there's 2 features. The first, called Psionic Sorcery, allows you to cast the spells that were granted by this subclass using sorcery points instead of spell slots. And you just use sorcery points equal to the level of the spell. What's more, when you do that, the spell doesn't require verbal or semantic components, and it doesn't require material components if they're not consumed by the spell. And here we go. This is it. This is what we've been waiting for. This is Wizards' attempt to fix the sorcery class, and it goes a long way to doing it. What they've done is they've incentivized using sorcery points to cast these particular spells, so the sorcerer is not going to be doing this like a wizard. He's not going to be acting like a wizard. He's going to be casting this weird group of spells with sorcery points, and when he does so, it gets a free subtle spell, which is how a sorcerer ought to be casting things. He's not waving around hands, he's not speaking, he's not grinding up diamonds or tossing things in the air. He's just doing it naturally. And now when you do that, whenever you cast any one of these spells, they can't be countered. Counterspell doesn't work against you. Can't be tied up and stopped from casting these spells. You can run around in an area of silence and still cast these spells. And that's an identity. From now on, all the time, you're the guy who can't be countered. You're the one who's just naturally casting. Now, it's for a restrictive number of spells, but it's a start. Also at 6th level, you get Psychic Defenses, which means you gain resistance to psychic damage and have advantage on saving throws against being charmed or frightened. Again, you just have these things. It's natural to you because you're magical. These are great abilities, especially advantage against being charmed or frightened. Resistance to psychic damage, well, there's only so many things you're going to run into which do psychic damage, but it's nice to have and it's really fitting. At 14th level, you gain Revelation in Flesh, which allows you to physically alter yourself to match the alien influence of your sorceress origin. So you can spend 1 sorcery point to see invisible creatures. You can spend 1 sorcery point to fly. You can spend 1 for a swimming speed and to breathe underwater. You can spend 1 to become slimy and pliable and squeeze through narrow spaces. These are all nice abilities, and being able to get any of these for a sorcery point is much cheaper than having to pick up any of the spells that do corresponding things. What's more, these are all things that fit what you are, and you can use them at any time. There's no recovery. There's no once between short rests or long rests. Just whenever you want to see invisible, spend a point, you can. You want to fly, spend a point. You get all glistening and weird and Lovecraftian, and you can fly. You want to become a slimy thing going through narrow spaces, spend a sorcery point, and you can. It's not about casting a spell. It's about being naturally magical. Now, there's a good chance that you don't do a lot of underwater stuff, so maybe that won't pop up. But since they did toss flight on here, you're gonna use this. Then finally, 18, you get Warping Implosion. When you teleport, it causes everyone around you to have to make a save, and if they don't, they take some damage and are pulled toward the center. This is nice to have. However, when I want to teleport, chances are I'm not necessarily going to want to be doing a bunch of damage around. And if I want to do a lot of damage around me, then I want to do more damage than this does. It's an alright ability, and you will probably find use for it in certain settings, but you'll also find a lot where you'll go, I wish I could just do the damage, or I wish I could just teleport. What's more, the save is against strength, and monsters tend to have a good strength, so you won't be doing a lot of damage with. But it's an alright ability. It's also a little disappointing. I would have much preferred to have an ability 18th level, which would be an expansion of our level 14 ability, such that we could spend some points to become even more of what we were. Perhaps being able to generate lashing tentacles, being able to open an extra eye which could see everything. But this was Wizards' first real shot at fixing the Sorcerer, so I shouldn't expect too much. They did a pretty good job. And Warping Implosion is at least something that I won't mind having. But that grouping of spells, being able to cast them with sorcery points, allowing it so that I will never be counterspelled, being able to change with Revelation in Flesh, and having advantage on saving throws and resistance to psychic damage, that's all stuff that I want. That's all stuff that makes this character start to feel like magic is natural to them. This is the most sorcerer that we've had, and I think it is the best sorcerer class. It combines effectiveness with a real sense of identity, which I think is going to make this the most fun sorcerer to play. Of course, the thing is, this is a subclass. You can't fix the base class with a subclass. They tried that for years with the Ranger, and, well, now they've had to do what they did in Tasha's. But this goes a long way. What I would suggest is bringing some of this over into the main sorcerer class and into the other sorcerer subclasses. The obvious one is to add 10 spells to each of the other subclasses, which is pretty easy to do. Coming up with your own list of 10 spells that would be fitting for a Shadow Sorcerer or for a Draconic Sorcerer, not going to be too rough. The important thing then is to make those spells castable with sorcery points and to make it so that they don't require components. Again, making them natural. But that's not quite enough, and my other step would then be to bring this into the main class. The easiest way would just be to say that all sorcery spells work this way, that they can cast any of their spells using sorcery points, and if they do, then they don't need components. But that might be too much. And besides, part of the move here is to try and get the sorcerer away from just being a subunit of wizard, so making all of their wizard spells special really doesn't do the trick. I would suggest instead to choose spells that seem to be more innately magical, things that should be more like a creature would naturally use them. And the obvious ones for that would be buff spells, and that is buff spells when used only on the self. So, if a sorcerer wants to cast polymorph on somebody else, let him wave his hands around and chant just like the wizard does. But when he wants to change himself into a Tyrannosaurus Rex, he should just be able to do it. That's all for now. Please like and subscribe, keep playing D&D, and remember, there's lots of hookers and blow out there. Don't let it pass you by.